In the cold waters of the North Atlantic, between Iceland, Norway, and Scotland, there is a place where the modern world feels far away. A scattered chain of islands. No highways, no crowds, only cliffs, wind, and endless ocean. These are the Faroe Islands. At first glance, they seem peaceful. Green hills, small villages, waterfalls falling straight into the sea. But the more you learn, the more unreal they begin to feel. Because the Faroes are not simply beautiful, they are isolated, exposed, and shaped by nature in a way few places still are. For centuries, life here meant one thing: survival at the edge of the map. 18 islands rise sharply from the Atlantic, steep mountains, deep fjords, storms without warning. Even today, the weather can change in minutes. Sunlight, fog, rain, wind strong enough to silence the land. There are almost no trees. Too harsh, too open, too wild. And yet people built a life here anyway. That is the first mystery. Why settle on isolated rocks in the middle of the ocean? Historians believe the first arrivals came over 1,000 years ago. Some were Celtic monks searching for solitude. Others were Norse explorers during the Viking Age. They found only ocean in every direction. And once they arrived, the Faroes became a world of their own. Leaving was difficult. Staying required endurance. For generations, the islands were cut off. No ships for months, no outside help, only the sea, and whatever the land could provide. And the land provided very little, so the people adapted. They turned to fishing, they relied on sheep, and they learned to live with storms, as if storms were part of the family. But isolation creates something else too. Myths, stories of hidden folk in the hills, ghost lights on the cliffs, creatures rising from the sea. Because here, nature does not feel neutral. It feels alive, and sometimes unforgiving. Yet the Faroes endured. Small communities survived for centuries, balanced between the ocean's generosity and its constant threat. But a new era was coming, an era where isolation would begin to change forever. For most of their history, the Faroe Islands were not a destination. They were a test. Life depended entirely on the ocean and on the weather's mood. The islands offered no easy resources, no forests for building, no wide farmland, no shelter from storms. So the Faroes built a society around adaptation. Fishing became the backbone of survival. The sea was dangerous, but it was the only reliable source of food and trade. For centuries, men sailed into freezing Atlantic waters in small boats, knowing one mistake could mean never returning. Villages clung to narrow strips of land between mountains and cliffs. Some settlements were so remote they could only be reached by boat or by walking for hours across steep ridges in heavy fog. In winter, isolation became absolute. Storms could cut off an island for weeks. No ships, no outside contact, only wind, darkness, and the roar of the ocean. This life shaped a very specific culture. The Faroes developed powerful traditions of community because no one survived alone. Villages shared resources. Families depended on each other. Even today, cooperation remains part of island life. But nature was not the only force controlling the Faroes. For centuries, the islands belonged to larger powers. First Norway, then Denmark. Often forgotten by distant governments, the Faroes lived under foreign rule. To outsiders, the islands seemed insignificant. To those who lived here, they were everything. And then there were the legends. Because when people live surrounded by endless ocean under mist-covered cliffs, stories grow naturally. Hidden folk said to live in the hills, lights appearing on cliffs at night, voices carried by the wind. These myths were not just entertainment, they were a way to explain a world that felt unpredictable and alive. But perhaps the simplest symbol of Faroese life is this: sheep. There are more sheep than people here. They roam freely across the hills, almost untouched by fences. Even the name Faroe may come from an Old Norse meaning sheep islands. For centuries, sheep meant wealth, food, clothing, survival. The Faroes were never built by empires. They were built by endurance. Yet one thing remained unchanged. The islands stayed far from the modern world. Travel was slow, communication was limited, life moved at the rhythm of storms. But in the 20th century, everything began to shift, because these remote rocks in the Atlantic were about to become one of the most connected isolated places on Earth. Today, the Faroe Islands are no longer forgotten. They remain remote, but they are no longer unreachable. In the last few decades, the Faroes have undergone a transformation. Few would have imagined what was once a scattered world of disconnected islands is now linked by engineering that feels almost impossible. Road tunnels cut through mountains, bridges stretch across narrow straits, and most surprisingly, tunnels now run beneath the ocean itself. But for the Faroes, these connections are not luxury, they are survival. Because isolation here was never romantic, it meant missed supplies, delayed medicine, weeks of separation. Modern infrastructure changed daily life completely. Yet the Faroes have not become a typical modern society. Nature still sets the rules. Storms still cancel flights. Fog still arrives without warning. And the ocean still reminds everyone that these islands exist on the edge of something vast. Around 50,000 people live here today. The capital, Tórshavn, is one of the smallest capitals on Earth. Quiet streets, colorful houses, a rhythm of life that feels slower, different. The economy is still tied to the sea. Fishing remains the backbone of independence. But in recent years, the Faroes have also become something else. A destination. Travelers arrive to see landscapes that feel untouched, cliffs rising straight out of the ocean, waterfalls falling into the sea, villages wrapped in mist. Some describe the Faroes as the closest place on Earth to another planet. But tourism brings challenges. The islands are fragile. Infrastructure was never built for mass crowds, so the Faroes encourage a different kind of travel, slower, more respectful, more controlled. Because the Faroes are not an amusement park, they are a living home. Even today, there are places here where the road ends and the Atlantic begins, where you stand on a cliff and realize there is nothing ahead for thousands of kilometers, just water, wind, silence. And in that silence, the Faroe Islands reveal their true meaning. Not monuments, not ruins, but proof that humans can still build a life in places where nature remains stronger than civilization. The Faroe Islands are more than remote cliffs in the Atlantic. They are a reminder that the world still has edges, places where storms shape culture, where isolation creates resilience, and where life continues in harmony with the wild. Far out in the North Atlantic, these quiet green islands remain one of Earth's last true frontiers.